Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video we have my Game Week 10 preview and this will be a midfielders edition as we take a look at the best 20 midfielders to own at every single price point in FPL at the moment. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please do remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into it. So guys, I've separated the midfielders into budget, mid-priced, and then premium midfielders. In some of these brackets, you've got some midfielders obviously a lot cheaper than others, but I felt like that was the best way to try and group the three different sort of prices that we might be looking at the moment. And of course, I should say at this point, it is absolutely always team dependent. When I'm giving you advice, it's just me generally saying which players I like. So it's very, very team dependent. And also, as I just said there, it's my opinion and it's only my advice. So do take it with a pinch of salt. Of course, I'll use data to back that up, but you use your own decision making. You use the eye test. You try and pick the players that you think will do well as well. And that is always the way that I will advise you play FPL. So if this is the first video of mine that you've watched, I will never tell you what to do. I'll never tell you which players to bring in. I'll try and to present the data in an objective manner and allow you to come to the decision that you like. So with all of that being said, the first group, like I said, is the budget midfielders. And we are going from 4.9 million to 5.8 million. So Neto being the most expensive and Souček being the cheapest. Of course, there are some cheaper assets like Anderson that you could go for. But for me, I think what we're looking at in this video is maybe players that you need to rely on every single week. And whilst Anderson could play some games, I don't expect him to start every week. So really the cheapest that I would go is Souček. So I think the first kind of group that you've got is Souček, Palmer, and Adingra. I think these are the three players that if you're trying to squeeze in all of the big hitters, which we'll actually discuss in tomorrow's video on the deadline decisions video, if you try and squeeze in all of the big hitters, like Trippier, Watkins, Son, Salah, Saka, Haaland, you do have to go for at least a cheap seventh attacker. And in that case, it usually is Souček, Palmer, or Adingra. Now, all three of these offer something slightly different, so it's a very difficult comparison to make. Souček has the best data of the three, if we look at non-penalty expected goal involvement, and at the moment, he is playing as the number 10 for West Ham, and the fixtures coming up I actually really do like. Fantasy Football Hub don't like them as much, maybe because there are less favourable home fixtures, but they do have really, really nice fixtures, and if he continues to play as the number 10, I would argue he is the best of the three when you look at everything in combination. The issue I've got is that he has come off early now twice, and Kudus has come into the number 10 role. Now, in Europe, what West Ham did is they played Bowen through the centre and Kudus on the right. And I thought this is what Moyes would go for, right? I thought he would drop Antonio, Bowen through the centre, Kudus on the right, and keep Souček in that 10 role. And that may well be the case. But in recent games, Antonio has actually stayed on the pitch, and it's been Kudus that comes into the 10 role for Souček. Now, if that continues, it could be that Souček either drops back into defensive midfield, or more worryingly, it could be that he misses out altogether. So due to that, I still think Souček is relatively nailed to start, but his minutes are a slight risk for me. So maybe I'm less keen than I once was. Palmer is probably the best asset if fixtures didn't exist, right? He's on penalties, he looks relatively nailed, and the data is okay. And I think the penalties is absolutely massive, especially when we're looking at such a cheap asset. He's obviously scored 2 recently. I think he will stay on them despite Sterling sort of battling him for penalties. So if Palmer remains nailed and remains on pens, I think he's an excellent option. The issue is that Chelsea's fixtures, as you can see here, are the worst in the league up until about game week 14, game week 15. So really Palmer is a long-term hold, and I would worry that over the next set of fixtures, you probably don't really want to own him. Obviously, Adingra's fixtures are much, much better, right? But the issue with Adingra is he fully nailed? Now, with Solly March out injured and a few of the other injuries that they have, Adingra could well be nailed on to start. I just worry again with all of the European fixtures that they have, which obviously West Ham have to battle with too. I do worry that Adingra might have slightly lower minutes than you would hope. Again, especially if you do need to rely on that player every single week. So regardless of the fact that his fixtures aren't the best, I do think just due to everything taken into account there, I still think Palmer is my favourite sort of 4.9/5 million pound midfielder. But I think all three of these could offer really, really nice value. Then I think you have the other four, right? Hwang, Douglas Luiz, Gordon, and Neto. I'll start with Douglas Luiz because I do not like this as a pick at all. The data is shocking. 0.20 non-penalty expecting goal involvement per 90. He's been very, very over-reliant on excellent long shots, and they are a high quality, but also a ridiculous number of penalties. And once the penalties drop off, and once he stops scoring the amount of long shots he has, because regardless of how good you think he is, that is not sustainable. You can see here that his data from open play outside of those two things is just not really there. So for me, don't like Douglas Luiz. I've seen some people suggest that Diaby isn't as good of a pick as Douglas Luiz. That is absolute nonsense to me. Diaby and Watkins are well and truly worth the extra money that you're paying. I know he's got the fixtures there, and I know he is on penalties. And I just said with Palmer, that is great. but you need something on top of that. He's an extra 0.5 on top of Palmer, and you can see he's got half the non-penalty expected goal involvement. So for me, love the fixtures. Don't like Douglas Luiz as a pick massively, which leaves Hwang, Gordon, and Neto. And as you can see, I've starred Hwang and Gordon instead of Neto, but all three of these players have very similar data. You can see 0.59, 0.53, and 0.50 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So why do I favour Hwang and Gordon over Neto? They've just got slightly greater goal threat. Neto's goal threat isn't bad at all, but they've got slightly greater goal threat in Hwang and Gordon. Neto has got slightly higher creativity, and also Neto is the most expensive. And when I'm looking at three players that have very, very similar data in Hwang, Gordon, and Neto, why would I not choose the cheaper options? And like I said, if they're a greater goal threat as well, I would much rather my midfielders be getting goals than assists. But all of that to say, I think Hwang, Gordon, and Neto are seriously good options. And I myself would say, if you are on a wildcard or if you're using transfers and you can stretch for the extra money over Palmer, I think I prefer Hwang, Gordon, and Neto to Palmer. And it's probably worth spending the extra little bit of money. Probably Gordon would be my favourite option at the moment, just because I think there's a mixture of decent fixtures, decent data, looks relatively nailed as well. And we spoke about this on Twitter earlier today, but I don't think just because he plays in a good team, that is an advantage. But the good thing you do have about playing in a good team is you would expect Newcastle to continue to create chances and to score goals as well. At the moment, Wolves are attacking fairly well, but they are not the quality of attack that we see with Newcastle. So will Neto and Hwang be able to maintain the data that we can see now? I'm less convinced than Gordon, just simply because the team, whether Gordon's in it or not, they would continue to create chances due to the quality that they have. So I think for all of those reasons, I slightly prefer Gordon, but I do really like Hwang and Neto as well. So with the budget midfielders, I think if you're going for a cheap one, Palmer is the safest. Penalties, looks relatively nailed, may miss the odd game. Obviously, no Europe to contend with, but the fixtures aren't there. So if you want a fixtures play, it's probably Souček or Adingra. And then with the other four, Douglas Luiz is the only one I really don't like. And then it would be, for me, probably between Gordon and Hwang. So moving on to the mid-price midfielders, we have 6.3 million all the way up to 7.5. And then in the final section, we're looking at those more expensive midfielders. And we're specifically looking at Arsenal versus Spurs mid, because I know that's going to be a difficult decision for a lot of us this game week. But in this section, we do have a lot of really, really good value players. I mean, I could conceivably see a really solid midfield in FPL with 3 or even 4 of these midfielders, and it is very difficult to decide between them. I'm actually going to start with 2 of my least favourite, and that's Pascal Gross and Ward-Prowse. My issue with Pascal Gross is the data just isn't there, and I think there are much better options, even from Brighton alone. Obviously, Mitoma, in my opinion, is a better option. Adingra may even be a better option for 1.3 million less, and outside of that, I think just for a couple of like 0.3, 0.4 million more, you can stretch to some of the really solid midfielders. So for me, whilst the fixtures are there, and whilst his minutes are very secure, I'm not interested in Pascal Gross, and sadly, I'm not interested in Ward-Prowse either, because despite the way he started the season, he's now dropped into a defensive midfield role. We just spoke about Souček. They've switched roles, right? So now Souček is the one playing that number 10 role, and Ward-Prowse is playing even deeper than Alvarez at points, right? He's playing more like almost like a quarterback, right? He's playing in that, like, in between the centre-backs at points, spraying passes, and whilst he plays that role very well, he's just not getting the opportunities from open play anymore. So whilst he'll pick up goals and assists from set pieces, and maybe the odd one from open play, I don't think he's value at 6.3. And to be honest, I wouldn't sell him for a hit, but if you've got transfers and nothing else to really use them on, no other pressing issues, Ward-Prowse, even with those fixtures, may potentially be worth selling. That's when we then get on to, in my opinion, the 4 best at this price, which is Mitoma, Mbeumo, Diaby, and Bowen. I think all 4 are great. I'll keep it nice and simple for you. I will not say a bad thing about any of these 4 assets. I would love to have all 4 of these in my team. You can see that I've actually starred, which is my favourite ones from this list, Mitoma, Mbeumo, and Bowen, and actually left out Diaby, despite the fact that arguably over the next 3, Diaby does have the best fixtures. We'll start with Mitoma. Mitoma is a beautiful footballer to watch, right? He's got the skill, he's got the flair, and eye test does matter, and it's lovely watching Mitoma when you own him. And the data is pretty decent as well, at 0.53 non-penalty expected goal involvement. There has been talk about the fact that with all of the fixtures that Brighton have coming up, maybe he could be rotated and rested, but I just don't think that the schedule actually looks that bad for Brighton, and I think he is their most important attacker. So I'm going to go out on a limb here and say I actually expect Mitoma to start all of the upcoming Premier League games, and I think at the very least, you're going to get one. And we saw the one that he was benched recently, came on at halftime and scored a brace, right? So if you do miss one fixture with Mitoma, I don't think it's the end of the world. I think maybe the idea of Mitoma being rotated and rested has been slightly overplayed amongst other members of the community. I'm not too worried about it myself. So Mitoma, one of my favourite options, brilliant value at 6.5, and may potentially be coming into my team in Game Week 10. Mbeumo continues to be fantastic. Comfortably the best data on this list, right? 0.69 non-penalty expected goal involvement. Obviously, he's also one of the only players on the penalties on this list. In fact, I think he is the only player on penalties. Obviously, Gross might take them if João Pedro's not on the pitch. Ward-Prowse is probably third in line. So Mbeumo is the only penalty taker at this price as well. So there's very little to dislike, right? The most minutes on this list, the best non-penalty expected goal involvement on this list. The only slight issue is that Brentford's fixtures are a bit of a mixed bag coming up, and there are certainly better fixtures to target with the likes of Diaby and Mitoma. But other than that, I really can't say a bad thing about him. Mbeumo is, and always has been this season, an excellent FPL option. Diaby, like I said, feels like the highest upside chasing one, just because Aston Villa are fantastic at home, and they've got some really nice home fixtures coming up, starting with Luton in game week 10 at home. So I really like the fixtures. The data's just not really there for Diaby. He's been pretty consistently sat at about a 0.4 non-penalty expected goal involvement. And if you actually watch the last couple of Villa games, Diaby's not playing quite as central, and he's not getting quite as high up the pitch. So he's playing more like a second striker to Watkins. That's what he's been playing all season. But I feel like he's been drifting into the channels a little bit more and working on his link-up play to link the midfield to Ollie Watkins. And as a result, he just doesn't seem to be as good as he was in the first few game weeks. But I also think he's been unlucky not to get a couple more returns. And he's been maybe very, very close to getting on the end of a few passes. He slid Ollie Watkins in a few times, and then Watkins has fluffed his lines. So I still like Diaby. I'm not going to say a bad word about him. But just due to the fact that the data isn't quite there, and obviously there might be a little bit of rotation with Europe coming up, and just due to the fact that I love Mitoma and Mbeumo and Bowen slightly more, at the moment, Diaby's probably my fourth out of those four options, which feels crazy to say because the fixtures are there, but other stuff isn't necessarily there alongside it. And then probably my favourite of all of these, as you can see by the thumbnail and on the picture here, is Jarrod Bowen, because he kind of has everything other than penalties. He's got the minutes, as you can see here. He's only come off once this season for a couple of minutes. He's got sort of the second highest or third highest projected points here, and he actually has the best expected goals on this list. Right? So he's got all non-penalty expected goals, I should say. So whilst his non-penalty expected goal involvement is actually the fourth or fifth highest on this list, his expected goals is the highest, which means he's the greatest goal threat of all of the options here. And on top of that, when you're looking at per 90 stats, Diaz doesn't get 90, Diaby doesn't get 90, Mitoma doesn't get 90, Gross and Ward-Prowse generally will get 90. Sometimes Ward-Prowse will come off. So really, not only does Bowen have the best expected goals per 90, he's one of the few that gets 90 minutes as well. We know about the fixtures coming up for West Ham too. So for me, Bowen has absolutely everything you would want, bar maybe penalties, but I don't necessarily think he needs it. So for me, Bowen is the best of the options on this list. And then we'll finish with Luis Diaz, sort of in between that mid-price bracket and then the more expensive midfielders. Is just not worth it for me. Now, the fixtures are beautiful for Liverpool coming up. I mean, they're arguably some of the best in the league. I know Fantasy Football Hub have them as 12th, but that's over a slightly longer period. And again, Fantasy Football Hub really do value home fixtures, and they don't have the best set of home fixtures coming up, Liverpool. But the fixtures are there. Luis Diaz's data per 90 is pretty decent, but he's not getting 90 minutes. And the reason I'm happy to take a risk on someone like Darwin is because when Darwin gets 90 minutes, his data is outrageous. And even if he only gets 60, in 60 minutes, he can still accumulate like one expected goal. You just don't see that with Diaz. So I feel like if you are going to take a risk on someone's minutes, are you going to bring in a player that's a big rotation risk? You have to do that with a player that has immense upside. And Luis Diaz has never shown that. So whilst Darwin, I think, is worth the risk on minutes, I don't necessarily see that with Luis Diaz. But that being said, I think all of these options on here are decent in their own right. For me, Gross and Ward-Prowse not interested in due to data and positioning. Luis Diaz, for me, minutes are an issue and his data is not that good. So it's Mitoma and Mbeumo, Diaby, Bowen. To rank them over the next 3 or 4, it's Bowen, Mitoma, Diaby, and Mbeumo, simply because the fixtures aren't really there for Mbeumo. If we're ranking them as assets in general, it's probably Mbeumo, Bowen, Mitoma, Diaby. So really you have to think about what you need from this player. Do you need them long-term? Are you attacking the immediate few? Because if you're attacking the immediate few, I still don't even mind Diaby as a pick, or Mitoma, or Bowen. So think about what you need them for, but I think any of those 4 middle ones, you're absolutely fine with. So finishing up, we've got the premium midfielders. And of course, this is the difficult decision to make this week because a lot of us own Maddison and Son and maybe another midfielder in there. Maybe you've already got like a Bowen or a Mitoma. And then you're looking and thinking, hang on a second. Over the next 3 game weeks, Arsenal play Sheffield United at home and Burnley at home, and I don't have a single Arsenal midfielder. What on earth do I do with my team? And it's a difficult decision to make because every single player on this list is an absolutely fine FPL option. I don't hate any of the options on this list. I have omitted Marcus Rashford and maybe a couple of other players, but these are the real ones that we are probably considering ourselves. And in their own right, they are all fantastic for different reasons. But there are obviously some that I prefer slightly more. And for some of them, the data's just not necessarily there. So we'll start with Phil Foden. I was shocked when I looked at his data last week. It's pretty poor, right? It's not good at all. And he's actually played a significant amount of minutes, almost 700 minutes and a 0.31 non-penalty expected goal involvement. So Foden's not an option at the moment. For some reason, whatever reason, even when he's playing, he's not necessarily accruing the chances. And to be honest, that goes for most of Man City, because Man City at the moment are about 7th or 8th for expected goals. So as a team, they're not creating a lot. They're not getting many chances. And that's one of the reasons that Foden, Haaland, and even to some extent Alvarez don't necessarily have the best data. So for me, Foden's not an option, especially when you do consider the fixtures as well. We'll do Martinelli, Saka, and Ødegaard in a second. I'll actually skip to Bruno Fernandes next. I think he's fine, right? He plays 90 minutes every game. The data here at 0.57 non-penalty expected goal involvement, really, really decent. He's on penalties. As I said in the previous section, the good thing about him is he's one of those players that is actually on the pitch for 90 minutes, which a lot of the options that we maybe would be considering otherwise aren't. And the fixtures from Gameweek 11 to 13 are great. Luton, Everton, and Fulham in 11, 12, and 13. Not necessarily in that order, but they have those 3 really nice fixtures. So if you are happy, I mean, 8.3 feels like a steal. I may well sell him this week, but with the idea of bringing him back in for that Luton game in game week 12, I think it is, or maybe even bringing him in for 13. So I am likely to sell him this week because there is a specific Arsenal midfielder that I would quite like, but definitely an option from game week 11, or if you can bench him this week, maybe you end up keeping him. So the difficult one this week, we've got Martinelli, Saka, Ødegaard, Maddison, Son, right? And like I said, a lot of people, myself included, have both Maddison and Son, but we would like to own at least one Arsenal midfielder. Maybe you don't have the funds to go straight from Maddison to Saka, so one of your options is maybe selling Maddison, downgrading another player, and then doing Maddison to Saka. Or maybe you're just thinking, for £1 million, why don't I just do Son to Saka and save all of that money? Or maybe you're thinking as well, which is another thing that I'm considering, maybe we just do Maddison to Martinelli, right? We don't have to lose Son. Maybe Saka's fitness has been a bit of a doubt recently. Is his data all there? Maybe we can just get away with a high upside Martinelli. I will say that 2 of the players out of those 5 have horrific data this season. Not horrific, but pretty poor, right? Martinelli is sat at a 0.3 non-penalty expected goal involvement. But a lot of Martinelli's minutes have come against more of the difficult sides. And historically, Martinelli's minutes have actually been... Martinelli's data has actually been very good, right? His expected goal involvement tends to be pretty high. He's actually usually a greater goal threat than both Saka and Ødegaard. So I'm not overly worried about Martinelli's minutes. I'm actually recording this after the Champions League game. Martinelli scored, which is an example of I don't really think he's much of an issue with respect to his goal threat and his creativity. So I still like Martinelli. Ødegaard is more of an issue for me because Ødegaard's data has never been quite there, but he's been normally quite reliant on his creativity, right? His goal threat's never been particularly high, but he creates a hell of a lot of chances. He's not doing that this season. He's actually sat at a 0.13 expected assists. So every 7 or 8 games, you would expect Ødegaard to get 1 expected assist. So he's not creating in this current role in the Arsenal team. And on top of that, his expected goals are really low as well. So no goal threat, no creativity. He's very reliant on the moment at the odd penalty that Saka hands to him. So for me, we can rule out one player here, regardless of his minutes. I'm not a massive fan of Ødegaard. I should just add a sprinkle of a caveat in there that Ødegaard does tend to absolutely bully pretty weak teams. So Sheffield United and Burnley do feel like very Ødegaard fixtures. In last season, he actually got 2 or 3 hauls against some sort of low block, lower league sides or lower side of the table side. So this is a very Ødegaard fixture. But I don't think you can bring Ødegaard in just because this is an Ødegaard type fixture. I think you've got to look at that data and say, in this current role, he's just not doing it. So I think you've basically got to decide, do you want to sell Maddison and or Son for Martinelli and Saka? And my initial response to that is probably not, right? So if we look at Maddison and Son to start with, Maddison has 0.69 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, and Son has 0.68. So when you first glance at that, you notice 2 things. Maddison and Son have excellent data. And secondly, Maddison's actually got slightly better data than Heung-min Son. So you say nice and simple, you sell Son. However, this data takes into account the first 3 games of the season when Son didn't really do much and was playing out on the left. Since Son has become the number 9, he actually has 0.9 expected goal involvement per 90. And you may say, Ross, he doesn't get 90 minutes. If you just look at per appearance as opposed to per 90, his expected goal involvement is 0.78. So putting that all together, basically, since going to the number 9, not only is Son playing well and getting okay minutes, his data has improved even further. And I think, yes, it's not ideal that his minutes aren't particularly high, but even as I said, even if when you do per appearance as opposed to per 90, Son's data is still good enough to say that I don't really care if he's only getting 75 minutes. As long as he's playing, I think he's an exceptional option. And to just further add to how good Maddison and or Son could be, because we don't know this at the moment, one of them is probably on penalties. Yes, Richarlison could be on penalties, but we probably expect it to be Maddison or Son. And at the moment, we don't know. So it may be worth trying to keep both of them and just seeing who's on pens. Because if you add penalties into the equation, on top of these, like 0.7 and 0. Let's say 8 for Son since moving to the 9, incredible data. If you add penalties, it gets absolutely ridiculous. Now, Maddison did come out in an interview. I think it was on like Norwegian TV or something, and said that lots of people practice penalties and whoever is confident on the day will be the one that takes the pen. So it may well be that Maddison, Son and Richarlison all sort of spread penalties around, which may make, again, both of them really nice options. So I'm really, really struggling here at the moment to justify selling Maddison and Son for all of the reasons that I've just listed. And I don't actually think the fixtures are that terrible coming up, but they are definitely decreasing, right? They're not as good as they were in previous weeks. So if there is a time to sell Maddison and or Son, it is probably now, but I'm struggling. So at the moment, I've gone off any plans to move Maddison and Son out. I was looking at Maddison to Martinelli. I was looking at maybe doing Son to Saka. I just can't do it now. And that's not just due to the fact that they returned in game week 9, right? The data suggests that they will continue to return. The fixtures aren't that bad. And when you add penalties into the equation, it could be even greater. So for me, Maddison and Son are not sells, which I know a lot of people won't like because they want to move to an Arsenal mid. If you are to sell one of Maddison and Son, I think you sell Maddison. I know Son's 1.4 million more. I just think he's so worth it. He's got such insane goal threat. I still think he'll be first choice penalty taker. He might not take them all, but I think that as well. And I think he is the only player on this list, along with Salah, that I can see regularly hauling. I mean, we've seen it on 3 occasions already this season. Son has brace and hat-trick ability, and not many other players in the Premier League have that on a consistent basis. So for me, Heung-min Son is an absolute priority to have, probably only just behind Salah. So there are 2 players that I would absolutely categorically have in FPL at the moment. It is Salah and Son. So just to put that first little bit together, Son and Maddison wouldn't sell. If you are to sell one, it would be Maddison, in my personal opinion. Then when we move between Saka and Martinelli, this season, of course, it's Saka, right? Saka's data is over double Martinelli's. Last season, it was a lot closer. But of course, what you get with Saka that you don't get with Martinelli is maybe penalties. All right, penalties some of the time this season. Better minutes, and just more nailed on to start every game. Because I do worry, especially given that he's just come back from injury, could Trossard get the odd game from the start? Yes, he could. Will Martinelli continue to come off early? Yes, he will. So it's a position where Martinelli would have to offer quite a bit more than Saka to warrant the chance of missing out and also the early substitutions. And at the moment, I actually feel like Saka offers more. So despite the fact that Saka is 0.8 million more than Martinelli, I think honestly is probably worth it. So if you can squeeze to Saka, I prefer him for all of the reasons. And actually, Saka's data this season is better than it was in previous seasons. This is actually Saka's best season for non-penalty expected goal involvement at 0.63. And again, when you sprinkle on the odd penalty here and there, it does make it even better. So for me, Saka is worth bringing in this week. Saka would be a priority for me to bring into your FPL teams. I would just say that he is still struggling a little bit with fitness, right? In the UCL game today, he did go down injured for quite a while at one point, but then he did get 81 minutes and he didn't look injured when he came off. So I do think he is still nursing an issue, which may put you off him, but it doesn't seem to be massively impacting his output or his data, as you can see here. So prefer Saka to Martinelli. So unfortunately, we're in a position where if I were to sell one of the Spurs mids, despite me not wanting to sell either, it would be Maddison. And if I were to bring in one of the Arsenal mids, it would be Saka. And of course, you might go, well, that's obvious, but I don't have 0.4 million. I would argue you try and find that, because I don't like selling Son and I don't overly like Martinelli instead of Saka. I would like him as an addition to Saka. So it's a difficult one. If I were to prioritise at the moment, but we should actually just finish with Mohamed Salah. Ridiculous asset, absolute priority to bring in. The best data on the list. Obviously on penalties, 90 minutes, some of the best fixtures in the league coming up as well. And just so reliable for captaincy to have in your team. Salah for me is the absolute priority to bring in this week. If you had to only prioritise one player, Salah needs to come in. I think he's been lucky to get 4 returns in 2 games, 2 penalties. Very, very lucky. We saw that with Mbeumo at the start of the season. But the data's there, the consistency's there, the reliability is there, the creativity and goal threat. He's got so many routes to points. Salah ahead of these fixtures is an absolute must for me. So if I were to prioritise at the moment, Salah, Son, Saka. Outside of that, Really, it doesn't matter. Whether you go for Maddison, Mitoma, Mbeumo, Diaby, you stretch to a Palmer or a Souček if you need a cheap seventh attacker. I don't really mind, but for me, Salah, Son and Saka are absolutely essential. I will definitely not be selling Salah and Son, and I'll be looking for a way to get Saka into my team because I think those three are arguably even more important than Erling Haaland at the moment because Son is just such good value with such high attacking threat and obviously much, much cheaper than Haaland, right? We're looking at £4.5 million cheaper. Salah is getting close to Haaland at the moment, if not outscoring him most weeks. And Saka, again, much cheaper price, really nice fixtures and good data as well. So I think when we look at budget, when we look at positioning and stuff like that, Salah, Son and Saka, for me, would be the only three essential players to own in FPL at the moment. So I think you look to get Saka in, you don't do it at the expense of Son, and you find another way. I suppose the final question to answer on this before we finish is if the only way that you can get Saka is by selling Son, do you do it? And my answer to that is no. I think Son is a better FPL asset than Saka, regardless of the fixtures coming up, because I don't think the fixtures for Arsenal are perfect by any means. In fact, it's Sheffield United, which is obviously great, but then followed by that, they have Newcastle, then obviously Burnley, and then the fixtures do get a little bit better, but I still feel like Son is a better asset than Saka, even for the extra 1 million. So that's my opinion on it. Let me know if you disagree down below in the comments. I already have Son, Maddison, Bruno, Salah, and Bowen. Right, that's my midfield five. I'm lucky, that's why I went without Erling Haaland. I've got that Bruno spot to move to Saka, and I'll have to make a defensive transfer in order to fund that. So I will have Maddison, Saka, Son, Salah, and Bowen, which is arguably the best midfield five you can have at the moment, but I have had to sacrifice Erling Haaland to get there. So guys, there you have it. That is my Game Week 10 preview. Again, a real specific focus on midfielders. All of the other questions around Game Week 10, I will answer in tomorrow's deadline decisions video. So if you do have any questions that you want to ask me outside of the midfield questions that we've just answered, do comment them down below. I'll address them in tomorrow's deadline decisions video. We'll also have a wildcard draft on Friday and my team selection video tomorrow as well. So there's going to be 4 videos in about 24 hours. It's going to be absolutely manic, but hopefully you do enjoy it. Until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.